History is so beautiful, they say, and that we must find meaning and wisdom in it. Even though the Pan-Africanists are so worried of this current generation that seem to ignore the African history, and that this current generation cares not of our history, but the future. Is it not a self-defeating exercise that seeks to diminish the sense of our identity and belonging, and nationalism and Africanism? Maybe you know Equiano Olaudah, or maybe you know him not. I however bring him unto you, and we must celebrate Equiano for having championed for the British abolitionist movement, a movement that saw the end of the barbaric slave trade. You know, or you know not, that Equiano Olaudah was captured while 11. The terrorists of slavery separated this child from his parents, family, and the Eboe community at large. Eboe is a kingdom in Benin, and this heinous kidnapping of our Olaudah happened around 1756. Equiano's enslavers were so cruel and barbaric, and the anima in them could not allow them to sympathize with the 11-year-old Eboe boy. Neither could they sympathize with his mother, as the Swahili adage affirms, uchungu wa mwana aujuaye ni mzazi. Their greed and or berserk for slaves convinced them to view an 11-year-old boy as an adult and worthy to provide free labor, particularly on their ships and in their houses and in their plantations. Indeed, like many Africans under enslavement, Equiano suffered while building Europe and for their survival, as Bob Marley sings it loudly and eloquently for the Buffalo Soldier, or the black men under slavery fighting for their survival. Moreover, Equiano was part of what was defined by Klein as the most mobile labor force available due to their lack of ties to the family, kin, and to the community. The entrepreneurs of slavery knew that once they have cut off you from your people, you become a commodity or a robot to be used, misused, or killed if unworthy or disturbing. Klein further posts that the slaves, of course Equiano included, did not only play an important role in domestic sector, but were a crucial factor for the economic welfare of the system they were subjected to. And that is how our people, our forefathers, our ancestors whose blood gave birth to us, contributed to development and growth of European and or American economies. Don't you think history is so beautiful? And can we afford to lose it? Besides, Equiano and many Africans were painted as people without any hallmark of civilization, that they were a people without a god, law, religion, and even wealth. This is to be interpreted as Africans had no structures at all, yet the very villains against the Africans struggle to annihilate our beautiful structures. And the worst of it is that the enslavers referred to our ancestors as the cursed generation of Ham. Ham, as you are aware, is Noah's son that laughed at his naked and drunk father and went about spreading such a message that his father was naked and drunk. Upon regaining consciousness and learning of Ham's message, Noah placed a curse on him and his descendants to serve his brothers forever. The African enslavers capitalized on this scripture and assigned Ham's generation to mean the Africans. Imagine of that Africans are the descendants of Ham. Whether Ham was white or African is another anecdote or a story of another time. By and large, historians pontificate and underscore that if your history is written by your enemies, then it's replete of lies and is never the true history. For this reason, I laud Equiano for having penned down his autobiography titled The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano. In his slavery, Olaudah Equiano arrived in West Indies while 18 during the Sugar Revolution and was perturbed of the denial of his freedom by the manipulation of Captain Pascal in Barbados, and he sailed to England even after helping Pascal successfully with the battles in waters and on ships. Indeed, Equiano's story is so disturbing. In Montserrat, Equiano is sold to Robert King, a Quaker from Philadelphia, who enslaves Equiano to work for him both in West Indies and in Philadelphia. In succinct terms, Equiano was commodified and objectified and was not worthy to be a human being or otherwise to be equal to any white man. Nevertheless, Equiano, though denied freedom through incessant betrayals by his masters, he eventually managed to secure his manumission by literally buying it. He saved money to purchase his freedom. That is how evil his subsequent masters were. They cared not for him because to them, Equiano and or any Africa were things to be authorized and objectified. Equiano's excruciating experience as a slave and an African and the abolitionist struggle saw him briefly become a commissary to Sierra Leone for the Committee for the Relief of the Black Poor, his concerns for the settlers, some 500 to 600 formerly enslaved people, and for their ill treatment before their journey ultimately led to his replacement. Equiano was fired from his new job because he complained of corruption, which displeased the authorities. In his book, The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano, Equiano describes his African people's life as simple but of dignified culture. He pontificates,
"The people have few luxuries but live by firm morals, with elders acting as legal experts. Many events are celebrated with dancing and feasting."
He recalls his love for athletic pursuits, learning to hunt in his youth, and how his mother doted on him. His mind wanders in a string of rules on how such peaceful childhood is interrupted one day when kidnappers abduct him and his sister and take them away into slavery. Besides, he wonders why and how they are assumed to be commodities or items on the market to be sold and transferred from one merchant to another, and he laments the brutality of the European slavers towards the African captives and the terrible confines of the slave ship. Equiano is unhappy on how his enslaver Henry Pascal renames him to Gustavus Vasa, and indeed different masters call him different names. This is to mean Africans had no right of identity and belonging. They were prejudiced not just because of their color, but fundamentally for being slaves and being inferior as they were defined. Indeed, slavery was so dehumanizing. Imagine some people discussing before you about your value, how much should they sell you, and that this slave is going to be a good investment or not. That was a terrible experience of Olaudah in slavery. With a lot of epiphany, Equiano rhetorically asks in his book,
"But is it not the slave trade entirely at war with the heart of man?"
Here, Equiano appeals directly to his enslaver's sense of morality. The heart of man here is framed as a kind and generous. Equiano is saying that slavery, which rests on cruelty, injustice and hatred, is against the better nature of mankind. My dear Africans, isn't history so beautiful? Should we not support Pan-Africanism for common good of all the Africans, including those in diaspora? Indeed, we can't afford to ignore the lessons from our ancestry for betterment of Africa, whether today or tomorrow, and for African posterity. The spirit demonstrated by African Union for the support of Johnson & Johnson to have the African vaccines against corona is such a move to show that indeed we must unite and support such Pan-Africanism agenda and appreciate Rwanda's Paul Kagame for another initiative. My dear Africans, learning from our history is indeed beautiful, and we must continue to perpetuate the lessons of our history for betterment of this huge continent.